Hello, welcome to another episode of Analog Adventures. My name is Crispin Jeffrey Franco. I'm a co-owner of Stacks Book Club. Joining me tonight is author Jinwoo Chong. Jinwoo is the author of two amazing novels, Flux, which came out last year, which was a New York Times Editor's Choice, a finalist for the Penn Hemingway Award for debut novel, and named Best Book of 2023 by Apple Books, and a couple others as well. His latest novel, I Leave It Up to You, is due out March 4th. And I do want to note Flux will be out in paperback right after that, right? The very next week. Is that right,
Next
Gino?
week. Yep.
Nice. Perfect. Well, thank you so much for joining us tonight on Analog Adventures. What are you drinking tonight?
Thank you, Crispin. It first very, very nice to be here. Thanks for having me. I'm drinking a water with an electrolyte tablet
That's
inside it.
very, very responsible of you.
Yes. I'm gonna be 30 this year. I've become obsessed with like gut health, like just fiber intake, all of these very boring, horrible things that I now have to pay attention to.
Yeah, well, let me tell you, your 40-year-old self, when you get to that milestone with me, well, thank you for thinking of that in advance.
Yes.
Well, what can you tell us about I Leave It Up to You? I read this book a couple weeks ago as part of my like reading ahead, the things the publishers send our way. First of all, like the cover art jumped off, you know, the screen at me. It was like, oh, this book looks like it's trying to say something. And read the description and just kind of was like all in, and I loved it. So yeah, what can you tell us about I Leave It Up to You?
Absolutely. It's my second novel. It's about a young man who wakes from a strange incident, basically a 2-year coma in which COVID has happened. His job is gone. His fiance has left him. A lot of basically everything in his life has changed or has vanished. And he doesn't really have any other option but to reconnect with his estranged sort of Korean American family that run a sushi restaurant in Fort Lee, New Jersey. And it is about this character, whose name is Jack Jr., learning to start over again from absolutely nothing and to understand, the reasons for his having been estranged from his family, but also to find new ways to appreciate and love them.
Yeah, the story is very touching. It's very tender. There's a really beautiful love component to the story, both familial and and not, which I thought were really well done. And for a character that has spent 2 years in a coma, like you said, that sort of comes out of that experience into a world that is different and changed. Uh, there's also so much humor in the book that I found to be just so uplifting and just I think a really nice balance to the overall story that you told. So well done.
Thank you.
So you had Flux that came out last year, right? 2023 was the debut of Flux.
Yes,
And then now we're here another spring, winter later, and we've got another new book.
that's right.
Holy cow. What's it what's that like? Were these two stories that you always had queued up, or did it just so happen that it just
Uh,
lined up this way?
this one I had queued up and I wrote it. I had a lot of time to write it because when my first book was on submission, so book editors were looking at it, basically everybody was saying no and politely declining it. And this went on for about half a year. And so in that time, I had a lot of space to try and distract myself. And one of the things I did was to work on something new. The two novels, which I think we'll get into later, they're really, really different in that the tone of I Leave It Up to You is a lot more joyful and funny and hopeful, as you say. And that's absolutely a reflection of the headspace I was in while I was writing it. It felt like my dream was never going to come true. I was never going to be a published author. That Flux would sort of be dead on arrival, and then I would have to start all over from scratch. And as a result, I tried to pour all of this hope and desire to like writing again into this new book, and uh, because of that, um, this new one is so much happier and funnier and more joyful than I probably would have done it if I weren't writing under those circumstances.
That's really interesting. Yeah, the tonality of the two stories is definitely different. I I read I Leave It Up to You. That was my initial work of yours that I read and then went back and checked out Flux to figure out like what did I miss? Like I really love this book. Did I just miss this like sleeping giant before? And I loved Flux too, but they were so different. And that makes total sense hearing you talk about it. Flux, for those that haven't checked it out, it's like it's not science fiction, but it's like borderline, I would say. There's like some science fictiony elements to it. This one obviously is definitely more of like a pure literature, pure
Mhm.
literary fiction. So that they like there's some differences there, but just the overall tonality of the story. But there's also some things that are common and similar between the two books. I felt at least thematically. So uh, like, is that intentional or are those just things that just kind of like leak out because those are just things that you're interested in talking about?
Yeah, the things that they have in common are things that they also have in common with me. They're the two main characters are Korean. They have sort of these kind of overwhelming and all-encompassing relationships and dynamics with their family. They're both narrators are in their late 20s, going into their early 30s, and feeling a lot of stuckness, kind of a lot of ennui in where they are in life. And I can definitely empathize with all of that. I, I it was an interesting thing to move from the kind of speculative fiction, science fiction element of Flux into something more real. I found it a little easier. The concept of like breaking rules and kind of having to build a world was pretty stressful when I was writing Flux, and I never knew how far I wanted to take it or whether it was far enough, and whether the world seemed interesting enough, but separate enough from what we recognize today for it to be compelling. And I didn't have so much of that pressure with the second one. I enjoyed writing both a lot for really different reasons. But it is really interesting to see the similarities in those two books, given how different they are.
Yeah, I mean, I think the family dynamics definitely, and I'd like to ask about that. Like, as a younger brother myself,
Ah,
there were like brotherly moments in both books that I was like, oh yeah, like that resonates as like somebody's lived experience between kind of like the tensions and the expectations and I think and I Leave It Up to You as you start to like unspool the challenges and the struggles that the family has gone through, both with the main character Jack Jr.'s medical condition, but then also the life of owning a sushi restaurant in New Jersey and like being a small business owner and like some of the things that go along with that. There's like a lot of tension between the brothers that for me maybe landed a little bit too real.
yeah.
So I guess that's leading up to a question of is or and same thing in Flux. There's some like brotherly conversations that happen in Flux too that feel similar. So is that pulled from real life?
It is what I would say about that is that I'm very conflict averse. I don't like arguing. I end up basically crying every time I try to argue with anybody, and that goes double for anyone in my family. And so, those moments where you have some sort of argument and then, 9 hours later in the shower, you're saying, "Oh, I wish I would have said this. This would have really killed them." Like those kinds of things are what I'm putting into these confrontations between the characters. And it's sort of my way of saying like, well, this is what I would have said in this situation if I had more time and I was less terrified of confronting people.
I that resonates as well, very well. So I do want to talk about the setting of I Leave It Up to You. Um, so the main character you said at the very beginning, Jack Jr., uh, awakes from a coma unexpectedly after basically being detached from the world for almost 2 years. It was a very specific period of time in which you set that coma to occur. Like were big changes in the world that went on while Jack Jr. was unaware of what was going on around him. So I wouldn't call this a COVID book, right? It's a book that takes place and has a connection to the COVID pandemic, and the characters, touch on that throughout the story. But what made you decide to set the book in that time frame as opposed to pre or post, or another time frame?
Yeah, COVID was the springboard of this book. And I was specifically inspired by I think somebody must have been filming The Amazing Race or Big Brother or something. And the cast members there are sequestered, like as they are. And some of them, there was one, I think, on Big Brother where they had to watch New York City sort of shut down and hear maybe weeks after the fact that the city was basically empty, that scores of people were going to the hospital, and they were all receiving this within a minute from some producer who had to come on camera and let them know for 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 security reasons. And that was so fascinating to me. And if I could pin it down to a single moment of wanting to write this book, it did start with somebody waking up from a coma and figuring out all of those things. And then for me to find out, okay, so, in the greater world, all of this has happened, but in this character's world as well, with his family and his fiance and things like that, what could have also happened there to make it all the more shocking.
Mhm.
And it makes for the first chapter to be really just kind of a harrowing thing to happen to anybody. But I do hope that it comes off sort of funny because it is
It
supposed to be a little funny.
Yeah, I mean, the first chapter is like laugh out loud funny. You have this character that's like obviously experiencing this like traumatic experience. You have characters who are sort of like almost being traumatized in reaction to the traumatization of this patient that is unexpectedly waking up and gaining lucidity, and like this sort of like scrambled thoughts that Jack Jr.'s having as he's like leaving sedation. And oh man, the first chapter was just, it was so funny. I think it set a beautiful tone for the book going forward, because right off the bat, Jack Jr. is dealing with like real things, and so are the characters around him. But there's so much levity in the way that he's approaching it, and the inner dialogue and the spoken dialogue. Like I think for a first chapter, it's really lays out nicely where the book is going in terms of like tonality, and that laugh out loud humor like persists throughout. I can't describe to readers out there how funny the book is, but at the same time, it's like a serious book, and so like, yeah, I just love it.
I'm glad that comes through. It's the thing that makes me smile when reading it. And usually I don't smile when reading my own work because it's part of it is the embarrassment of saying, "Oh, I actually wrote this." But the other part of it is that up until this book, my short stories and the first novel, of course, were a lot heavier and a lot darker in subject. And so it's been a nice vacation to go somewhere lighter.
That's awesome. So I want to talk about Jack Jr. a little bit. Um, this idea of the main character of the book, like for all intents and purposes, has been like reborn, right? He was had a life. That life essentially ends. He goes into a coma. Readers will figure out the things that happen between all of that uh, taking place. But then he awakes in a new world, and like you laid out earlier, all of his attachments are gone. His job is gone. His fiance is gone. But in their place is a family that had been gone prior to that. And it's a really beautiful way to structure the, if I could redo everything that I had done wrong, what would I change, without having a magical library or a magical door or a magical apartment. Like there's nothing about the story that is fantastical, but it hits on that theme of, if I had the chance to relive my life and right the wrongs or make different choices, would I? And I found that to be such an interesting setup for telling a story like this, because Jack Jr. is given carte blanche to remake all the decisions that he may or may not regret having made the first time around. What was there an inspiration behind that like the idea of regrets, or where did that sort of come from?
I I think it built itself naturally around what could this relationship between a character who hasn't spoken with his family in 10 years be like if suddenly he was dependent on them for everything? You can't have a natural progression of, go out for coffee, reconnect a bit, wait a month, invite them to dinner like that. All the things normal people do to sort of reconnect with people in their own time, that's totally out the window because Jack needs someone to, um, manage his entire life. And to build him back up from just pieces. And so when somebody is thrust in that sort of situation, what is allowed to happen there and what can happen? That was a really interesting question that I was thinking about, that I thought a little bit about how I would react if I had to do that with my own family, how my mother and father would sort of, with under the system that they have, that they love a child unconditionally, as Jack Jr.'s parents do, what sort of questions that they would have to wrestle with as well, dealing with their own hurt that their child has gone basically no contact with them for a decade prior. And so all of those, complications in it make it really just a messy affair. And I think that's what makes it honest and true. And I'm hoping that's what people recognize in that story and can sort of match to their own experience of family. Because every family's messed up. Every family, is chaotic in its own way.
Yeah, I think this story does one of the things that I really like when you're telling a multi-generational story. And in this book, we get three generations of narrative, but we get really a fourth generation of implied narrative through Jack Jr.'s, parents, and specifically his dad and his grandfather, and some like resentment and father son stuff that is hashed out or maybe never hashed out between the two of them because of the decision to become a sushi chef and the things that go into the Korean and Japanese conflict and like the cultural boundaries that are like tied up in that. It's like a that is like a cultural relationship that I've become aware of recently, like more recently. And it's like really fascinating to see how the different generations sort of like balance that relationship. But I really like when books properly demonstrate like our grandparents leave an impression on our parents, who leave an impression on us, who leave an impression on the next generation. And if like unaddressed, those things can cause problems, and addressed, they
Yeah.
can cause problems. And this was a messy family, but like more families are messy than not, I feel. So I loved it.
Mhm. Yes. And you have to wonder how much, is genes, like do people act this way because of something chemical inside, or is it memory based on stories that they've been told? It's all of that. And I guess it's in all cases it's both. It's just this kind of very messy, kind of mangled thing that gets passed through the years.
Yeah. So I want to talk about one of the characters, Juno, who I think was maybe, I mean, Jack Jr. obviously I love, but like, so Juno is Jack Jr.'s nephew. Um, and he is so hilarious in so many ways. Um, is Juno ripped from somewhere in your life? Juno is like, Juno is trying his hardest throughout the book to make everybody happy, but sort of grapple with, am I making myself happy by making others happy? And like, what's my familial duty to do the thing that my parents want me to do or that my grandfather wants me to do? But I just love Juno so much. He was such like a pop of energy every time he popped on the page. I just could not get enough of Juno.
He doesn't exist in my life. I wish he did. And I think it is my idea of what anyone younger than me now is. And when I was in college, I felt this way about people in high school. Now I feel this way about people in college, and so on and so forth. Like they're always someone whose actions are kind of alien and kind of new, and there's always this sort of hint of kind of offense that that you don't get them, that it's just like, it's not, there's a feeling insulted by the disconnect between them. I feel like Juno is always sort of insulted by the fact that people don't get him and aren't laughing at his jokes and things like that. And I feel that's like the thing that I think is most recognizable in any generation younger than yourself is them thinking that they're cooler and better and that you don't know anything. And um, that makes for such a funny thing. And so I enjoyed writing him immensely. He's my favorite character.
Yeah, he was just so much fun. So one of the interesting things, it's something that I like think about a lot in modern literature, is how does technology become part of the storytelling narrative? Like what, like we communicate so much digitally in our everyday life, whether that's social media or text messaging or emailing, like we're doing very much less of this type of like human to human interaction in our real life. It's something that we like strive for with our store quite a bit, is like very engaged audiences, like people having conversations with people. That's something we want to get back to, but that's not how we always communicate. So how did, and because of Jack Jr.'s circumstances, he becomes very detached from everyone that was in his life prior. So he's not beholden to his cell phone throughout the entire book, really. Is that intentional? Is that something you're thinking about? Like, how do I get the phone out of character's hands? Because for Juno, it's opposite, right? Juno is very much connected to his phone. Um, and like, how do I get my characters to talk to each other? Is there like an actual thought process that goes into taking technology out of the equation?
I think a lot of the times it is for convenience. In the same way that mystery novels happen in resorts in the French Alps where there's no internet. Like,
Yeah.
technology is just, it makes things too simple sometimes. It makes communication too simple. You can just text anyone at any time and get an answer when I think the complexity is from like trying to get a hold of someone, trying to speak face to face, which can be really hard to do, and not everyone is able to do it at any given time with whoever. And because Jack kind of is just abandons all of that for, I think, the reason that, he feels he doesn't have anything left to go back to. I feel like he looks at it as sort of a clean slate. He has these really um, honest conversations with people that with members of his family that would have never happened if he were still estranged, if they were just talking over the phone, things like that. Um, I think it's something I feel should happen in my own life too.
Yeah.
We should talk to each other more. I mean, it is scary to do for all of those reasons that it can become really too real, but it's something that should happen more.
Yeah, I think that's like one of the big takeaways from the book, is like why does it take this catastrophic event to get us to extend the olive branch, to get us to like mend the wounds that like we know are there? And yeah, to me that was like the driving takeaway from the story, is like pick up the phone, call your mom, pick up the phone, call your brother, like figure these things out. Like time is fleeting, you never know what's going to happen, so like take action. I don't know if that's what you wanted people to leave the story with, but that's sort of like the driving message that I got from the story.
Oh, it's so true. I mean, it's easy to have a conversation with your mother about, oh, what are we gonna have for lunch? Did you pick up my whatever? Where's my socks? Stuff like that. It is so much harder to have a conversation with someone you're really, really close to about those things. There was an article in The Atlantic like a few weeks ago about how it's a phenomenon that people have a lot of trouble saying their loved ones' names and
Oh,
calling them
interesting.
by their names to their faces. And it's something I do all the time. I call my parents the word for mother and father in Korean. But I also call my brother the word for brother in Korean. I can't say his name. It's so strange to me. And I think that has something to do with it. When someone's so close to you, it can be a little scary to become honest in that way.
Yeah, the colloquialism almost like creates like a buffer. Like it sort of like creates like some natural distance. I totally get that entirely.
Mhm.
Trying to think of anything else on this book. I like would love to talk to you so much more in depth, but I want to be conscious of the fact that no one will have read this book, save for the advanced readers by the time this episode comes out. So readers, if you're out there, pick up I Leave It Up to You. It is such a fantastic book. I'm so excited that we'll be bringing it into our store. There'll be at independent bookstores everywhere. What is next on the horizon for you? Is the next book like a year away already?
It is theoretically.
Okay.
I've signed one of those two book sort of things, and it's been packaged together, but um I'm still writing it. And so it is very strange currently to talk so much about I Leave It Up to You and then go home and then have this new book that no one's gonna read for like 2.5 years and be of two minds in that way. But hopefully I will finish this third book and it'll be more of like a cousin of I Leave It Up to You tonally. I'd like to stay a little bit more in like the real world, and I hope I have high hopes for it. I'm enjoying writing it so far, so we'll see how it goes.
Good. Well, I'm excited to see what that looks like when it comes out. We'll wrap our time with you by asking you one last question. What's the last great thing that you've read?
Oh,
Could be
um,
anything.
Uh it's so I read every book, not every book. Every book I read, I rate out of 10. And I never give these ratings to anyone. I find them kind of stressful and a little too like telling about my tastes. However,
Wait. Before you tell the book, we got to get into the rating system because the ratings are so I do the same thing, but I do it out of five. I like no longer like publish ratings on books because I can't create anything at all. So I don't want anyone to know that it like anything that has been out there is better than anything I could create. So like I don't ever want to like disparage anything that anyone's ever written, but I know like exactly what my 3, 4, and 5 star quote unquote reads mean.
Yeah.
What do you have like a scale? Is there like specific things that a book has to do or an action you have to like the book has to get you to do to put it in a certain category?
It is really just not even about the quality of the thing I'm reading. It's the quality of my experience reading it. And if that's a 10 out of 10, as in, I have to read so much that I don't want to read, or that
Yeah,
I'm mandated to read so much and I don't really read so much for pleasure. And so I do skim like quite a bit. And if I'm not skimming, that's really good sign. And I do it out of 10. And so the last 10 out of 10 read was The Wager by David Grann.
nice.
And I am super into um his work now. I read Killers of the Flower Moon a while ago, and he's got one other book, but The Wager is it came out last year, I
Last year,
think.
yeah.
It's
Yeah.
a yeah, it's like a pirate shipwreck mutiny story, all true, like unbelievably meticulously researched. He's a master storyteller,
Yeah,
and
there are some really wild, like tangential characters that pop up in that book that really like tell you the depths of the research that
yeah,
he went to like find these stories. Yeah, that book is great.
yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I Leave It Up to You is out March 4th. Flux will be out in paperback March 11th. Head out to your local independent bookstore and grab copies of both. I promise you will enjoy them. Thank you so much for joining us on Analog Adventures, and we can't wait to see what you do next.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.